Okay, I'd like to welcome you all to our event tonight. We're going to be talking about a man named William Dwight Franklin and the group that he founded called the Continental Vocalists Quartet. I think we've got a good show for you. What I'd like to do to start is just thank some of the people who made this possible. Jenny Marino, who manages this community center and did an excellent job for us. Ed Ciccarella, who just told me to talk into the microphone, who is the president of the Historical Society and has provided quite a bit of support. And John, back there, John Murphy, our tech guy, who has been invaluable. Okay, why didn't that go? Okay, what we're going to do tonight, you probably already know, I'm the town historian. What I want to do is talk about the history around these touring groups and give the Continental Vocalists a little context. Okay, once we've got the context, I'm going to give it over to Marge Murk, who is related to William Dwight Franklin. She's his fourth great grandniece. Is that true?
I think so, yeah.
Yep.
Sister just did the
Okay, right. Then we caught a real break in having Keith Traver offer to have some of his guys come in and sing some of this music for us. So a lecture about music could probably be pretty boring, but hopefully it'll be the frosting on the cake before we're done. Okay, so getting started, touring groups in the 19th century, the time you want to think about is the time around the Civil War, say 1853 to the late 1860s. And the things that were going on then, touring groups were very popular. If you think back to that period, no TV, no radio, no nothing. Whatever information you got from the outside world was either printed material or live events, people, lectures, concerts, that sort of thing. So the tours were very big time back then. Okay, the more popular kind of tour that you probably heard of are these minstrel shows. Christy Minstrels. I noticed gray hair here. You may remember the New Christy Minstrels. They have nothing to do with this group, absolutely nothing. These groups, the Christy Minstrels, the Boston Minstrels, Bryan's Minstrels, there was a group called the Ethiopian Serenaders, and there's a little hint about what they did there. What they would do was they were all assembled about the same way. You can see a line here, here, here. And there was a guy in the middle who was called the interlocutor, and he ran the show. And he would introduce acts, and there were two guys on the ends here, and their job was to tell bad jokes and make bad puns and disrupt the interlocutor. Well, I'll get more on that in a minute. Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, there are two kinds of touring groups. Now, the groups I was talking about, the minstrel groups, were called vernacular groups. And the problem with the vernacular groups is I still love some of their music. You know the song "Oh Susanna," "Polly Wolly Doodle," anything by Stephen Foster, usually come out of these minstrel shows. And I love that music. What I don't love is the fact that they did these performances in blackface. And the lyrics to these songs, if you ever heard the original lyrics to "Oh Susanna," you'd be appalled. They were just incredibly racist, very vernacular, if you will. Okay, so you think about that as vernacular music. It had its merits, and some of it is carried on even to today, and some of it is best left to history. Okay, our group was not a vernacular group. Our group was called the Cultivated Group. Okay, and you had a choice. This is just before the Civil War. If you think about people's attitudes just before the Civil War, issues like slavery, patriotism, those sorts of things were on the front burner. Everybody was thinking about them. Everybody was talking about them. These guys focused on family-oriented messages. Religion, they were very religious people. Patriotism was very, very big. And if you think about patriotism in 1853 to the end of the Civil War, it was a controversial issue. You wouldn't want to sing "Rally Round the Flag" in a Southern venue, for example. They just didn't want to hear it. Toward the end, after the Civil War, they focused to some extent on temperance. If you're a real history fan, you know that the Civil War and the soldiers who left the Army after the Civil War were very often drug addicted because they were drugged when they were wounded. A lot of them were alcoholics. Temperance was not a prudish thing. It was a real issue. So they started writing music about temperance. Okay. Press clipping of the time sort of sums it up. They say right down here, Christie's minstrels were an inimitable band, so they've shown them some respect here. Set one's thoughts to thinking of grotesque Negroisms, stale puns, and banjoers, but the word Continental, how it savors of patriotism and melody combined. Makes your heart thump, doesn't it? Okay. Okay, so here's our group. If you look at them as a group, we list all of their credentials. These guys were pretty big-time musicians. You know, if you're talking about somebody who taught at Boston Teachers Institute, that's big time. You know, he was an important person. And the same with all these other fellows. They all had claims to fame. You notice they all came from Connecticut. Smith came from Glastonbury. Franklin came from originally Norwich, but he settled in Rocky Hill, and New London and Brantford. So they were all Connecticut people. And some of the lectures I've done on history, I've said that it's a mistake to think that history stops at the town line, because it doesn't. I mean, if this is really a story about Franklin, who settled in Rocky Hill, but all these other guys contribute to what he did. Two people that we'll talk about a lot, I think, before we're done, are Mr. Smith, Mr. Franklin, and we'll start with Mr. Sterry, who was their business manager. So what Mr. Sterry would do they traveled as far afield as Wisconsin. So what Mr. Sterry would do, well, he would be the advance man to go to Wisconsin and set things up and negotiate rates and those sorts of things. Okay, so he had a multi-talented person, if you will. Okay, the group started in 1853, as I said, in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. They were originally the Continental Harmonists, and they changed their name pretty quickly to Continental Vocalists. I don't know why. Okay, all these guys had regional and national reputations as musicians, because as I said, this was a time before radio, television, what have you, that you got a national reputation for touring, and people would look forward to you coming to their town to perform. Pretty nice stuff. Okay, an interesting little anecdote that Marge found for us. They performed in uniforms that were based on the uniforms worn at the Battle of Buena Vista during the Mexican-American War. Okay, Mexican-American War was 1848, right? And so this is what these guys wore. This is amazing to me. These are based on soldiers' uniforms. They do not look like soldiers' uniforms, but they were, okay? Okay, these guys were not only singers, they were musicians. You find them playing piano fortes, violins, horns, and they played them as part of their performance. So when you went to see the Continental Vocalists, you got your money's worth, basically. Okay, was witnessed by the fact that, as I said here, the group enjoyed many return engagements. Okay, and if you look along the wall here, Marge has provided us with some of their examples of sheet music promotions, what have you, which they sold. Okay, so they had more than one way to make money. Okay, and the music included that Glee book there, which is a real collector's item that Marge can tell you about that later on. Right? Okay, touring in the mid-19th century. Okay, this map was done in 1860, just as the Civil War was getting started. And you notice this is the North, this is the South. This was really the land we got from the Mexicans after the war, for the most part, and the gold rush. But if you were going to tour, this took you 6 months to a year to get here, so they didn't go here. There was nobody here. Nobody down here wanted to hear a song like Rally Round the Flag, because they were about to not rally around the flag. Okay, so this area in blue is really where they traveled, and they got as far west as Wisconsin, we know. We have a record of that, excuse me. Okay, so how do you get there? You don't get in your car and drive, you know that, not in 1853. The way you usually got around was on water, primarily on water. You could go with a horse and buggy, but it would take you a long time. Railroads were getting started, but they were just getting started. If you study history, you know that the Civil War made the railroads boom and explode because they had to move troops, they had to move material around, and the railroads came into their own. But they were there before the Civil War. But if you wanted to get to, say, Wisconsin, and you were in Hartford, Connecticut, you go down the Connecticut River, down Long Island Sound, through Hell's Gate, up the Hudson River, down the Erie Canal, into Lake Erie. Once you get into Lake Erie, you're home. You can get a steamboat to anywhere in the Great Lakes, Mississippi River, the Ohio River. So touring was done primarily on water. Okay. This is just, these are some of their tickets, which I think there are copies of them over there if you want to get a good look. Okay. They were making a lot of money. I'll show you that in a minute. Although they also did pro bono work. These were, what do you want to call them? Responsible people, civically responsible people. I think that was part of them being classical, is that they did sing responsible music and did responsible things. Okay, pro bono, okay. The problem with being a touring guy in the mid-19th century was the time you spent away from home and family. And I'll describe some of that in a while, but I used to have a job where I traveled every week and stayed in hotels and ate in restaurants. And when I took the job, I thought, oh, what a great adventure. It takes about 2 weeks for that great adventure to end. And then you're just a guy in a hotel eating in a restaurant, or probably taking room service and watching Barney Miller on television. And it's a really boring way to live. And it must have been the same thing for these guys. Okay, so we start in 1853. They started their first tour, 77 concerts, which is a lot, okay? And, okay, our documentation will tell you they made $5,503. That's in 1853 dollars. I put this thing through an inflation translator, and what they really made was about $200,000. So this was not a trivial venture. There's a lot of money involved in this, which is, while you're on the road wishing you weren't there, you realize I'm making a lot of money doing this, so it's not that bad, okay? Okay. The same thing happens, second tour, they made lots of money. Problem is, remember Mr. Frisbee? He got lung disease. I don't know what disease he got, but he was replaced by a Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson got rave reviews. He was the same breed of cat. He played an instrument, he sang, conducted choirs. He was really good. Okay. Okay, and off they go to another tour for $146,000 in today's money. So they're making a lot of money for sure. Okay. Then Mr. Huntington left. Touring is hard, became an organist in Hartford. He left on good terms. He was replaced by a man named Hall, who also developed a good reputation. You remember Mr. Sterry, who I mentioned a while ago. He was their road manager, and I think he sang. I believe he did. But he was replaced by this W.B. Thompson, who got mixed reviews. The people in Connecticut loved him. The people on the road did not like him. They thought he was a quibbler, a nitpicker, and they questioned his honesty, which means he was probably doing his job. That's how I read it anyway. Okay. Mr. Lewis, we want to talk a lot about Mr. Lewis before we're done. Okay, he played a violinist. He was known as a prodigy. He played as a child. Okay. And they went off on a tour with him. In that year, they made $2,000 and $8,000 in modern money. So they're still making pretty good dough here. Okay, off to another tour in 1857. Okay, about 1858, whoops, didn't mean to do that. 1858, they stayed in the East, in Connecticut and Massachusetts. probably to take a breather would be my guess. Okay, and then back on the road. Okay, the significant thing that happens here is the Civil War starts, which seemed to have an effect on their profitability and on their presentation style. Okay, so the nature of the performance has changed. We're talking about the Civil War. I would suspect there were a lot more patriotic songs because they were touring in the North, and we were at war with the South, as you know. They added a thing called a panorama. They had set pieces, a scenery, all along, but I'm assuming it's something you could carry away under your arm. These panoramas seem to be long things that you could crank, okay, and you would program your music and crank your panorama so that the picture behind you corresponded to the music you were making. Problem is that I suspect that was a pretty expensive piece of machinery to move around. And you can see it affects the profitability. Okay, they're down to $7,600 in 1861, 1862. Okay, they went off on a second panorama tour, didn't make much money. And what tells you is that I think a lot of it had to do with the Civil War, but they were faltering. They weren't making as much money. They weren't as popular. Mr. Smith and Mr. Franklin went off on a duet tour, which means they cut way back, okay, just to keep things working. Okay, and Franklin joined other groups and was traveling with those other groups at times. So the Continentals hit on hard times during the Civil War. Okay, 1864, the Civil War ended. The vocalists reconvened. They took on two tours. Surprisingly to me, the first tour went to Jamestown, Virginia, and so did the second. And they were profitable. But it kind of surprised me that they started going south. You wonder what was the mentality after the Civil War that made that acceptable. I haven't figured that out yet. Okay. Then disaster befell. 1866, this note is from Franklin's journal, said the old Continental Quartet with Smith is disbanded, never to reunite, having traveled together for 14 years, and broken up by Mrs. Smith. Ooh, the Yoko Ono over time, right? Well, her husband's on the road, right? From 1853 to 1866. She probably got sick of him being on the road. I can't say I blame her. Okay. How the quartet was, everything we've seen says they were very well received. I wouldn't say they were the Beatles of their time, but they were very, very popular. Okay. This one, Continental Vocalists. Okay, fire up for me. The Continental Vocalists are an unwelcome, what we mean to say, company of vocalists. They will give one of the popular entertainments at Houston Stadium. It will be singing, not the excruciating to both performer and listener performance to which people are usually invited, under the name of concert, but real genuine vocal music such as awakens in the heart a love for the true and beautiful. Wow, I wish they'd say that about me. The other one is interesting. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it's from a Connecticut paper. And they're talking about the Continental Vocalists, which by the 1850s had become the most successful male quartet in the country. So just to punctuate the fact that these were big-time guys in their time. And you may ask, well, who was William Dwight Franklin? Marge is going to tell you that.
Here's some background on the man that I knew growing up as Uncle William, the man in the portrait over the fireplace in my grandmother and then my aunt's house in New London. Growing up, my sister and I were not aware of all the details of his life and career. It was only that he was Uncle William and his sister was Aunt Lou. In the mid-1960s, I was contacted by Phyllis Bruce from Wesleyan University, who was researching and reaching out to the family for a paper she was writing about the career of the Continental Vocalists and the life of its co-founder, William Dwight Franklin. She contacted me, a Rocky Hill resident, to search real estate records about a house he built on Pratt Street in Rocky Hill in 1877 and lived and died there until 1906. He had bought land from William Buckley and additional land from the Dimmock family in Rocky Hill. Perhaps he became friends with the Dimmock family as he wrote a silver wedding song for them, and I have a copy of it over here. Because of her detailed account, we learned about William, his personal life, and his life with the Continental Vocalists. Among other things, he was a songwriter and a poet. With his wife, Jenny, because he was married 3 times, Jenny A. Goodrich of South Glastonbury, her father was Horace Goodrich, which is a very well-known family in Glastonbury. He had 3 sons, Eugene, Edgar, and Arthur. And there's a copy of something that his son Edgar and he wrote with his father, William, and I think it was 1892. The portrait, so he had 3 sons, and while he was married to Mary Hollister, they became involved in the temperance movement. Mary Hollister was a Mount Holyoke grad and a missionary. He built the house in 1877-78 at 27 Pratt Street in Rocky Hill. I have a picture of it here. If you've ever seen the house, it looks old. It really looks old. He and his son Edgar wrote about the Continental Vocalists and his sons Edgar, Eugene, and Arthur. I have a copy over here. In his later years, he spent post-touring years in Connecticut. He settled at 27 Pratt Street in Rocky Hill and taught, composed, and consulted on music-related issues in Middletown, Connecticut. He built a store at 54 Broad Street in Middletown, and his wife Jenny sold clothing materials while William taught music and advised on the purchase of instruments. He also taught music in the Middletown school system, was choir director at the Methodist Episcopal Church, and did some composition and publishing. He was an artist who designed cover sheets for his work, and he died in April 23, 1906. I would just like to say that I have a display here with all kinds of interesting things. My cousin Jack Jack Bird sent copies of his music, and I have copies of his music over there. And on the back of one of the music things was a blueprint for a house. And we always wondered if that was the one for the house on Pratt Street. This is the portrait of Uncle William that was in my grandmother and my aunt's house. It is at the Middlesex Historical Society. The portrait was given to the society by the family in 1998. And I have to say that my sister and I drove Uncle William in the back of a station wagon from my aunt's house to the Historical Society in Rocky Hill, giggling all the way. This is one of the costumes at the Middlesex Historical Society that was worn by the Continental Vocalists during their performances. And the picture on the left is the quartet with the costumes on. Most of the archival material about the Continentals and W.D. Franklin is in the archives at Wesleyan University, and I have a copy of all of the things that are there. In closing, I would like to read in closing a few of the remarks about William Dwight Franklin that Phyllis Bruce wrote at the end of her paper, some of which I found quite amusing. He was widely traveled. handsome, well-read, extremely romantic, had four-leaf clover in his scrapbook. A capable artist, designed cover sheets for his compositions, and on the back of one are detailed house plans, perhaps for the Rocky Hill house. A keen sense of humor, and her last remark is this: Franklin had a keen sense of history and often bought books on the subject. His interesting history certainly contributed to his ability to keep the careful records which have enabled me to reconstruct the life of this fascinating man. I would like to say, if at the end, if you'd like to see some of the display, things that are on display, feel free. I'm delighted now to introduce you to Keith Traver, choral director at Rocky Hill High School, who will lead the quartet of singers from the high school to sing of William Dwight Franklin's songs. Thank you, and thank you for all the help that was given to me along the way. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Traver, and like they said, I'm the choir director over at Rocky Hill High School and at GMS, the middle school. And tonight we have four of our members of the chamber choir, one of our auditioned groups. We would have five, but 'tis the season to get sick. So you may see me pinch hitting a little bit on some of the music. But we have Corey Christensen, Christian Olak, Leonardo Rios, and Abhinav Swaminathan. Right.
Youth's happy morn, how bright and fair it seems, filled with delight like hope's enchanted dreams. The morning sun flows out her sparkling rays, joy as we live amidst life's happiest days. Joy as we live amidst life's happiest days. In manhood's prime, how strong and firm we stand. The field of life calls every willing hand. The noonday sun looks down with silvery light. Proudly we stand in all our strength and might. Proudly we stand in all our strength and might. Old age comes on, the strongest tigers dare. The song of life sings but a vesper here. The golden rays of evening setting sun invite to rest, men's busy toil is done. Invite to rest, men's busy toil is done. I sit at stilly eve beneath some leafy trees, and think of lips like rosy bits of coral from the sea. And while the little stars in half send rays down soft and free. I wonder who with eyes of blue is thinking then of me. Those trusting eyes do not disguise the secret that is true. Of all the rest I love the best those gentle eyes of blue. Some other eyes may tend to charm, but blue I love always. For eyes of blue are ever true, and in their depths betray a pure intent instead of harm, and tell with each soft ray, oh sacred love like that above, that will not die for I. Those trusting eyes do not disguise the secret that is true. Of all the rest I love the best those gentle eyes of blue. When sorrow weighs upon my mind, in fancy I can see those misty orbs that love absorbs, smile cheeringly and free. And then they are so true and kind, and laugh in gentle glee, and tell so sure of love that's pure and happiness for me. Those trusting eyes do not disguise the secret that is true. Of all the rest I love the best those gentle eyes of blue. We are going far from home to the sunny, sunny clime, where the balmy zephyrs waft the sweets of gentle summertime, where our hearts are always bright, where the orange blossoms grow, and music mingles with the scene, and friendship's warmest glows. So goodbye, goodbye till then, when we hope to meet again. We never shall forget you. Oh no, we never can. So when we return again, we hope to meet you all, with happy hearts and smiling brows, to grace this festive hall. But if ne'er again we shall see your happy land, we ask your parting blessings on the Continental band. So goodbye, goodbye till then, when we hope to meet again. We never shall forget you. Oh no, we never can. Kind friends, we must speak the word to one and all farewell. May heaven's blessings on you rest, in music's magic spell. Say, will you sometimes think of us when round your loved hearthstone, and breathe a prayer to heaven for the wanderers far from home? Home, home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
Thank you all very much.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. I know I certainly did. Okay, as is our tradition, we're done talking, we're done singing, and now it's your turn for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to pose? Oh, the little girl in the back. Okay, you Historical Society people are required to ask a question. Okay. Okay.
Thank you all for coming, and please, feel free to look at the display here. If you have any questions about that, you can ask me.
Right. And a brief commercial. I am really impressed with this facility, as I hope you are. I think they're doing a great job. My second commercial is stop by the Historical Society down there at Academy Hall. Open Saturday from 12:30 to 3. Oh, I got it right. Okay, and thank you for coming.